We're here in the vineyards, harvest season 2016 in Virginia.
Almost over.
Almost over, which is going to be one of my first questions. And we're here with Dr. Tony Wolf, the state viticulturist for Virginia, the foremost expert on all things grape in this part of planet Earth. And really, he's a world expert all the way around. So we're here at the tail end of the 2016 harvest. Good harvest this year, decent harvest, bad harvest?
It's average harvest for us. Would have been a lot better if we hadn't had a lot of rain about 3 weeks ago. But yeah, it's yield-wise, we got our data out of our research plots, and at this point we're just cleaning up some of the border panels and non-research plots. But yeah, it's been a warmer season than average, and particularly nighttime temperatures have been warmer, way warmer than average, and I think those are contributing factors to the fact that we don't have quite the color development in our red-fruited Cabernet Sauvignon in this case. Our Petite Manseng, which is the other principal variety that we grow here at the Winchester location, pretty good quality on that, although we were seeing some Botrytis development on that as well.
So he just gave us a whole bunch of technical terms of which you know nothing about, and that's okay. That's what he does.
You'll learn them.
He's a scientist.
Come and take my course and you'll learn all about
that. Oh, no, ignore that. But yes, you actually should take his course. For those who really want to learn the nuts and bolts of this really fascinating industry. But let me back it up just for the people that are learning about wine. What is today's date? It's
18th of October.
Of October. Is that a standard time to be the tail end of the harvest here in Virginia?
For us, yeah. We're in the northern part of the state, and we have about 3,400 growing degree days here. So a little bit cooler area than, say, the Charlottesville area. So we're going to ripen a little bit later. And we've harvested as late as early November before, really cool year like 1992. So yeah, this is pretty much average for us.
So on average in, let's just say the United States, or I guess we should broaden it up to the whole northern hemisphere. What is it? Start in late September and usually wrap up in late October?
Oh, if you look at all varieties, the whole northern hemisphere?
Yeah, sure. Well, okay, we'll start with Virginia.
July.
We'll start with Virginia. When do you guys, on average, start harvesting in Virginia?
Late August.
Late August.
Yeah.
Okay.
For early varieties like Pinot Grigio, the Muscats, Pinot Noir, and even Chardonnay in the southeastern portion of the state and along the southern Piedmont, we'd be harvesting Chardonnay towards the end of August.
Okay.
And this year, given the very warm growing season that we had some producers down in the southern part of the state that were harvesting reds like Petite Verdot as early as late August.
Wow.
Exceptionally early.
It's funny because when we were at Varietals, she was telling us that Barbersville had already finished all of their harvesting a couple weeks ago. I thought, that seems odd. Is it just because it was a hot time of year or a really good harvest in particular parts of the state?
Well, it was hot throughout the state, and depending on the varieties that you're growing, and again the crop level, all those things that contribute to the rate of ripening in crop. If you were lucky enough to get everything right before the rains of that low pressure system towards the end of September, I think it was the last week of September, we got 6 inches of rain here in Winchester over a 4-day period. If you were able to get the fruit off before that and it was ripe, you were in pretty good shape. We went through the rain. We made the decision that we didn't have the fruit quality that we wanted yet, so we let the fruit hang through the rain. We took some hits with it, but now we are almost 3 weeks later picking. But we've had 2.5 really good weeks of ripening weather after the fact, so we've gotten some more maturity in that fruit that we're retaining. The downside of it is that, as you've seen, there's a lot of sorting out here in the field because of the Botrytis that developed with that rain.
Because of the rot.
Yeah, the rot.
Well, just to broaden it back up, so in Virginia, the standard harvest, this is white and red grapes, and everything in between, late August to about late October is about the standard zone.
Yeah.
But some things could go in a very good year into November.
Correct.
Okay. So how about if we broaden it up to the USA as a whole? Just generally speaking, the whole United States. It's about the same window, or
no, it's wider. You've got to look at places like Texas that start harvesting in July.
Or Southern California, maybe it's just as hot.
Yeah, maybe Southern California would have some certainly table grapes, but on the wine grape side, they might be starting late July, early August as well.
Okay.
Yeah, and then on the tail end, You know, places like Minnesota, Wisconsin, they're harvesting right up. And if you looked at ice wines, of course, those go all the way into the winter. But outside of ice wines, you're not going to get much maturation occurring after that first frost. So that's usually the definition of the end of the season, is when those frosts occur. Can be as early as the end of September in some places.
Yeah.
So
now we're broadened up to the whole northern hemisphere.
yeah.
Generally speaking, say 75% of the grapes are harvested in about a 2-month time frame, or a little wider than that.
I'd say 3 August, all of August through all of October.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And just so we all keep it in context, that we live on a planet that has grapes growing on all sides. In the southern hemisphere, when is the harvest season?
So early March through early May.
Okay.
Typically.
All right. And that leads me to the next kind of line of questioning is, how come everything's not just harvested at one time? And even for these particular grapes, we won't even pay attention to any other grapes. What is a viticulturist looking at when they're deciding it's time to pull these grapes off?
Yeah, good question.
Weather excluded. We'll put the weather, phenomena off to the side. What are we looking for these particular Cabernet Sauvignon grapes before we say it's time, let's pull them into the winery?
Yeah, there's a couple different factors that you're looking at. You're looking at primary chemistry. Those are the typical benchmarks that are used to evaluate the ripeness, the physiological ripeness of the berries. So the sugar concentration of the fruit, what we call Brix, the pH of the fruit,
acidity,
and the titratable acidity is actually, acidity and pH are 2 different things, but they're related, obviously.
Well, we're going to keep it simple.
Okay, so those are, that's the primary chemistry that we look at. Now on Cabernet, we also, in other varieties, we look at some of the secondary metabolites. We look at color, and we can do that analytically in the lab, but out here we're doing it visually.
Right.
Are the berries uniformly colored and pigmented? Anthocyanins, of course, are the principal pigment in the Cabernet Sauvignon. So we want to see nice dark berries. Phenolic maturity is another thing. There's skin phenols, and phenolic compounds are these astringent compounds that one would, if you think about persimmons, that astringency is from those phenolic compounds.
Is that is tannins part of the phenolic
They are.
breakdown?
They
Okay.
are. They are. So we're interested in softened tannins, the ones that are a little silkier or smoother on the finish. So we taste the fruit. Seed tannins are another form of tannins. They tend to be even a little more astringent. We're not too concerned about that, other than that some winemakers will look at seed color. The darker brown coloration of the seeds actually are considered a higher degree of ripeness.
Really?
As
Okay.
opposed to light colored, green colored seeds. And the freedom with which the seeds are held in the pulp of the berry is another indicator of
Healed, so the ease at which they push out?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. If you chew them or you squish them in your hand, if the seeds can be separated from the pulp very, very easily, that's usually a sign that the fruit's a little bit more mature. The other factor, unfortunately, is we have to look at the degree of degradation of the fruit. I mean, if you're being pushed by things like Botrytis bunch rot, you kind of sometimes everything else goes out the window, and you've got to get the fruit off, or you're going to lose it all to rot.
And or if a giant hurricane storm
Yeah,
is coming
we know,
and dumping tons
right,
of rain.
We know that at the end of this week it's going to be damp again, and the temperatures are going to be much cooler next week. So it's this week or not at this point for these Cabernets. So we might as well go ahead and pull it off.
So first and foremost, they're looking at the right amounts of sugar.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume the highest levels of sugar you can get for that season.
Not necessarily the highest. We've had years like 2010 where some growers were caught out because sugar accumulated very rapidly, plus there was a concentration effect due to the very hot, dry weather. And if you end up with fruit that is overly sweet, if the sugar concentration is too high, the alcohol conversion can be too high,
yeah.
and you end up with wines that are very volatile.
Too
and
hot.
Too hot.
Too
yeah.
hot.
Yeah.
So, but you do need, sugars are kind of the primary thing, because sugars will be turned into alcohol.
Sure.
You need a certain level of acidity depending on what style of wine.
And acidity is coming down at that point, so you don't want the acidity to drop out of the bottom, and at the same time pH is going up, and winemakers are very concerned about pH. And Cabernet Sauvignon, we get kind of concerned when the pH goes above 3.6 and 3.7. That's sort of the benchmark, and point above which then we're going to need to be adding acid back to the wine. So if your total acidity is fairly low, coupled with that high pH, that's not too bad. You can add titratable or tartaric acid back to the wine, and you'll reduce the pH and actually get your balance of acidity and sugar back where you want it to be.
Okay.
The greater problem, we don't have that problem so much with Cabernet Sauvignon, is if you have an elevated pH and your titratable acidity is very high, then it's more difficult to deal with. You can add more tartaric acid and drive the pH down, but then you get a really tart wine finish.
It won't be in balance one way or the other.
Right. These grapes, Cabernet is fairly well behaved in that regard.
And so sugar, acid needs to be in balance, but we also are looking for the color and the tannic component. I'm just boiling down the most important phenolic, the way I teach it, into the tannic component.
Those are the big ones. And then the flavor of the grape. I mean, if it's a little hard to judge flavor and say, okay, this is what the wine's going to turn out. But when we taste these grapes, we want to taste that the fruitiness that is typical of Cabernet Sauvignon in the fruit, and we don't necessarily want to get a strawberry character or again an acidic type of response on the palate.
Okay, and having said that, we're broadly speaking about the harvest season in different hemispheres, and we're broadly speaking about what the viticulturist is looking for as they're pulling it off the vine, or the winemaker who might be also out here in the field testing all this stuff. Now we can get more specific and make some sense out of his opening remarks about certain varieties. Generally speaking, we don't harvest everything at the same time because they don't come to ripeness at the same time.
Right.
So how does it generally proceed in any harvest season? What are the first things that you start to harvest early on? You said even late July, early August, and now we're here several months later harvesting different things.
Well, in a real basic sense, for people that really aren't into wines yet, if you think about the degree of ripeness and the phenology of ripening of the fruit, that is the seasonal ripening of the fruit, the white fruited varieties are normally the ones that are harvested first. So varieties like Chardonnay, Traminette, Vidal Blanc, those are typically going to be, for us here at Winchester, to use Winchester as a location of example, Chardonnay would be harvested in mid to late September, fairly early, a month ahead of this. We also have Petite Manseng, which is a white fruited vinifera. And that would be harvested around the first week or two of October, typically, into the middle of October. The Cabernets, most of the Bordeaux reds are going to be harvested late. Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Petite Verdot. The exceptions would be Merlot and Malbec, which are harvested a little bit earlier. So among the Bordeaux varieties, there might be about a 3 to 4 week window of harvest, with Merlot being the earliest. Malbec's actually, I said early, that's actually a fairly late ripening variety. We don't grow a lot of Malbec in Virginia, so I don't have a lot of experience with that. For us, Cabernet Sauvignon and Petite Verdot would be typically the latest that we'd be harvesting.
So generally speaking, whites are harvested before reds, generally speaking. But not all whites are equal and not all reds are equal, so depending on the variety, some come to fruition, let's say, before others. Where does one like Pinot Noir fall out and all that? Because it's somewhere in the middle.
No, that's actually a very early one. That's
is very early.
Yeah, that's like...
Well, but it's a red, but it goes early.
I know, but Pinot Noir and Pinot Grigio are really very, very early. They're like some of the earliest that we would have. Muscats are early as well. Those are white for the most part. The ones that are grown in Virginia, those would be very early. The other factor that comes into play is that, as I said, like with a given variety, you can also have seasonal differences. We just have some years that are cooler than others. That tends to delay the harvest or ripening. Seasons that are warm, like 2007 and 2010, are going to advance the ripening. So for a given variety, we could have as much as a month difference in year-to-year harvest date on it.
Okay, cool. Anything else you'd like to add about what happens in the vineyard that wine drinkers should know?
Well, the only thing I guess I can add, I'm not thinking too much here about more about what your audience is seeing with this. This white fabric that you see in the background here is bird netting. It's been pushed up and out of our way. Everything likes grapes, and birds are no exception. So we put this bird netting down about the point where the grapes started to ripen, and so that's what that is. The other thing you can see on this canopy is that these yellowing leaves in here, we've pulled a lot of those out. That's the normal senescence or maturation of the leaves late in the season. So just as the berries are ripening, the leaves are also going through a senescence process. And yeah, that's it.
Okay. Now you start to see some of the intricacies of what happens in the vineyard before it even gets pulled into the winery to be made into wine. I've been talking with Dr. Tony Wolff.
Thank you, John.
Virginia State Viticulturist and foremost world expert. Thanks so much for your time. And now, because all of this is so slick in our production, now I'm going to ask him to just start harvesting some of these grapes and selecting. And Katie's going to zoom into that one, what will look like a pre-planned artistic endeavor. Zoom into him and his hands as he finishes off some stuff.
Yeah, so what's going on here is that as I'm going through these clusters and looking at the berries, I want you to zoom in on that. You can see that some of these they don't have that complete coloration that I mentioned earlier. And
that's a lighter colored one, that's a lighter colored one.
As opposed to something like that, which is uniformly darkly pigmented. So those are not really desirable fruit for the style wine that is going to be made from these grapes. So taking a little bit of time to sort those out. Now the other issue that we're having with some of these grapes too is the development of Botrytis. And again, if you zoom in, I'll just point out this berry here. It might be a little hard to see, but
see that green?
There is a fuzzy growth on that. It's actually, some people call it gray mold. And that is a fungus. It's called Botrytis, and Botrytis affects a lot of different plants, a lot of different fruits, including things like strawberries. What happens in Cabernet is if that goes into the wine, or a lot of it goes into the wine will actually develop a kind of a moldy character. So we don't want that in the wine, and it's really easier to sort that out here in the field than it is in the winery. Most wineries will do some sorting. You've probably seen with John Boyer's class, you've seen some other videos where sorting is being done, and there will be some of that with this as well, but we'd like to do as much of it out here in the field as possible. So we have really, really bad clusters like this one where...
Yeah, so what happened here?
Well, there's some other things going on here. This is a physiological disorder. We're not really very creative in terms of naming things, but this is called bunch stem necrosis.
Ooh, that sounds scary.
So a bunch is a bunch of grapes. The bunch stem itself is part of the rachis, and necrosis means death. What has happened is a part of that rachis has died, it's dried up, and the berries distal to that, or on the outside, have failed to ripen, and so they dry up. They basically just run out of water and dry up. So we're going to take those off. It really would not impart a negative character to the wine, but it's easy enough to prune it off, so we do.
Cool.
So there's a pretty nice cluster.
I was going to say, end with a nice one.
Yeah. Pretty nice cluster of Cabernet Sauvignon. It was on the western side of the canopy, had good sunlight exposure. So that's one thing we're finding. We've always known that canopy management really needs to strive for good porosity of the canopy. That means openness of the canopy. We want good cluster exposure. But we're finding that, in some cases, more is better. If we really open it up and really get good air movement around the cluster, you can see this is a fairly loose cluster. It's not terribly compact, and this is a desirable kind of cluster architecture from the standpoint of rot avoidance or problem avoidance period. So that's a good cluster. We like to see that size.
Hold that up.
And that shape.
And fade.